Here we are for another edition of On Point. Today I'm joined by David Entwistle, who I'm sure many of you have heard and seen speak. He's the head of major projects for San Gaban and a newly qualified facade engineer. So I'm really excited about hearing what's been going on in his world. Hi, David. Really good to see you again.
Well, Rod, it's always good to see you.
Yeah.
By the way, I am director of major projects, not head of major projects.
There you go. I've already cocked up. So director of major projects.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually make a difference.
Yeah.
But great to be here. Thanks for your time and appreciate getting together.
Yeah, well, it's been a while actually trying to, I think we met back in '96 and I've been trying to get you onto some kind of podcast ever since.
Well, it's a busy schedule, it's difficult to squeeze people in, but appreciate your patience.
Thank you. So tell me, what have you been up to? What's been keeping you alert in this industry, which is ever changing over the last 10 years?
I mean, it continues to be a challenge, the business that we're in, especially big projects in London. It's a very exciting environment to be involved. I think London has always been one of the major construction capitals of Europe, probably by a long way, actually, to be honest with you. Okay. So, and it continues to be so. Certainly, and as we look across Europe, certainly at the moment, a lot of downturn. London is still very, very strong. So yeah, exciting place to work. And then really in the last 3 years, my life has slowly been taken over by this whole issue with what do we do with the ridiculous situation of how much glass waste is thrown away every year and what can we do to change that. So yeah, that's kind of increasingly taken over my life and become a big part of what I do today.
So you're talking about circular economy, you're talking about the sustainability and actually putting, where the rubber meets the road in ESG. And as you would expect, Saint-Gobain are sort of trying to lead the way in that. But where, at grassroots level, where, what are you seeing? How is that sort of coming to life?
I mean, I think it's almost scandalous in terms of what hasn't happened in the past. There was a Deloitte report done in 2016, and I think it was something like over 200,000 tons of waste glass per year in the UK disappears. It doesn't end up back as flat glass. Europe is 1.5 million tons of end-of-life glass. This is post-consumer glass that's had a life, and this is just flat glass. So it could be residential or it could be sort of commercial. So we got the scandal of this huge amount of glass that's just literally, well, not finding its way back to flat glass is the best way to describe it. A lot of it's chucked, a lot of it finds its way into concrete or into road covering. So that's kind of what we're trying to address at a grassroots level and trying to make it work. And I think we've had a strategy for domestic glazing as a business, which actually has been very successful. And the most difficult thing to crack was the commercial. And so that's taken us nearly 3 years to actually find a solution that's starting to work. So yeah, that's kind of it.
So you were saying that the stuff's going in the landfill basically, and now we're finding a way of repurposing it, and people are starting to recycle it on a sort of commercial level.
Yeah, I mean, I think not a lot may be going to landfill. Certainly in London, they're filling up the landfill, so you can't really, unless we're exporting it to other parts of the country. I don't know how much is going into landfill.
Well, every bit of laminate, I imagine.
Possibly. But obviously you mentioned the word repurposed, you mentioned the word recycle. And I think this is one of the big challenges we have at the moment is the language that people use. So, we talk about closed loop recycling. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there at the moment where, somebody will take some glass off a building, they go, we've recycled it, we've remelted it. That could mean a multiple of things to multiple people. Has it gone into glass wool, bottles? Has it been crushed into road covering? Nobody knows. The fact is, the average recycled content for post-consumer glass is less than 1% in new glass. So, and that's average across Europe. So that means whatever's happening to these, let's take Europe, 1.5 million tons of waste glass every year, less than 1% is finding its way back into the new glass that's being produced. So it's a massive problem. but people continue to use words like recycle, repurpose, and what does it mean? It means anything. So if we say closed loop recycling, I think we have a definition that means we keep the material at its original level. So we put flat glass back into flat glass. Yeah.
What's so if you're out there sort of flying the flag, what is the sort of three steps that are a must for I mean commercial obviously, and we're moving to that space where we're working with bigger and bigger projects in with FM with actually refurbishment. So our sweet spot's 20-year-old buildings.
Yep.
And they are prime for actually starting to think about predictive investment, taking the glass off, and there's a great news story about carbon, the
Yep.
carbonomics of that,
Yep.
meeting sustainability goals and all the rest of it. So what do you see as a sort of when you're talking to clients, what are the sort of tenets, the constants that they need to be as good practice?
I mean, I think we have to start off with circular economy principles, because if you don't have those, there really is no point. Because obviously the next question somebody asks you is, what's it going to cost me and how long is it going to take? And it's not that we always have the answers to those questions, but if you can't start to unwrap those issues, it's very difficult to start. And that's where we were 3 years ago. People would say, what's it going to cost me? How long is it going to take? And what's the route back? And we didn't know. We just had a theoretical idea about how we could take glass off buildings. And I think the point is we don't have a one size fits all strategy. We have an adaptable strategy. So, for example, for you on the maintenance side, you might look at a facade where they might try and retain the aluminium grid and replace the glass. So that would be a different strategy than what's happening on a lot of buildings in London, where it's a demolition contractor just ripping the whole lot onto the floor plate and just smashing it up and divvying it up and doing the best they can with the bits. So I would say the majority of the market is probably that, and what you're talking about is a smaller part of the market, but important. But you have different strategies for those, and they each come with different problems.
Is that and the reason I've gone for that is because if there's talk about embodied carbon, if we're talking about
Yep.
the most efficient building is
Yep.
the one that's there,
Yep.
then surely the grid work and the aluminium, which has got a great life cycle,
Yep.
should stay. You're not disturbing the stuff.
Yep.
Is there not an argument that that is the best way going forward?
I mean, it's certainly at the top of the pyramid in terms of do nothing
Hmm.
or reuse is a higher priority than recycling.
Right.
Predominantly for us, we sit in the recycling zone, and we've got good reasons for that. But I think if you just take your situation of you've got a 20-year-old building in London, you want to keep the aluminium grid, you just want to replace the glazing. Okay. So you've got a certain rebate depth you can get a unit in. One of the issues we have today is the method of calculating glass thicknesses is EN 16612, and if you've got a laminate, it's generally pushing the thicknesses of laminate up compared to the calculations we'd have done 20 years ago. So then you have a question of, can you get the glass into the rebate, or do you go for a smaller cavity? If you reduce the cavity size, that could affect the U value. Or, does the system have a thermal break? Probably, but not all of them do have thermal breaks. So there's a number of technical things you've got to jump through to make it work. But the fact is, even on a glass thickness calculation, people don't want toughened glass on the outside of buildings in London. So you replace it with a laminate. So you replace a 10 mil toughened with a 13.5 heat strengthened laminate. So all the time, everything's pushing the size of the glass up, and you've got a rebate size, but you've got to do something with it. So I mean, I think it's a good strategy if it can work, or if somebody could create an adapter profile to go on the front to increase the rebate depth. That's definitely a solution. But then you come back to the time cost issue for a client. And at the moment, we're still in that situation where most clients are just used to smashing things up, and they want the new building up as fast as possible to get a new tenant in. So, there's a process of catch up. I think we're still in that process of people thinking slightly differently about how well they look at their buildings. And obviously the planning system is pushing people that way. If you want to get your planning in London, you try and knock something down, it's much harder now. So
Yeah, I mean I was curious about that because obviously you must be part of that thinking process, with architects coming to you and saying, I've got this challenge, I've got the planning issue. As a company, are there solutions which are saying, okay, well, we realize that laminates on the outside is becoming more favorite, and therefore there's a weight issue and there's, the thickness issue. Are some of the gases inside, for instance, or other properties that can, bring a U value down by having a smaller? Are you working on that as well?
I mean, the technology's been out there for ages with different gases in the cavity, but again, you're into this issue of cost, and availability. So it can be done,
Yeah.
but you're just into this kind of diminishing returns thing all the time, I think, when you're trying to chase something that's unusual, you're narrowing your supply routes down. Um, so again, it potentially just puts more risk back into your project at a time when people perhaps don't want to take that risk.
Mm.
Um, and there's this whole question of, does the client want to change the aesthetic of the building? Does it look a bit tired? Is it a bit dated? So the idea of just replacing the glass is a good idea, but we have got many projects in London that we put the glass on 20 years ago, and and if the tenants moved out, it's in a prime London location. They don't want to have a stranded asset, so whatever they do has got to update the building to make it attractive for a
Mhm.
top end client. And just replacing the glass might not be sufficient to do that.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Like I said, there's no one size fits all, but I think this concept of the stranded asset is one that everybody understands
Yeah.
and trying to avoid. And most of the time it's not really architects we're talking to, it's mostly clients. Um,
So you're seeing it as driven by the client because of as you said. I mean, stranded assets. First time I heard that, and I'm sure it's been going on for tens of years, but it was a couple of years ago,
yeah.
and toxic buildings and things like that. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I didn't really understand what that meant and the impact of people being having a choice now.
Yeah.
Especially where commercial real estate people are deciding they're only going to be working 3 days a week, so the capacity. So when they're going to do that, they're they're gonna have a choice of where they're going to rent, or
Mm.
and I think that's big. I've seen a big move of people, the way they're refurbishing, the way they're
Yeah.
really making that work-life balance. Um,
Yeah, you get your meditation suite, breakout space, you see it everywhere. Running track on the roof, everything to try and get people back into the office and make it a more adaptable space. We're seeing that on in multiple places.
what are some of the facts that people aren't aware of that in its industry? Because I mean, I know you've spoken at various different international and national seminars and conferences, so it's probably got it off pat. So what are some of the things that are real estate probably don't know about glass?
Well, I think the fact that you can recycle it, it doesn't degrade each time you recycle it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a valuable resource and it's a great story for people, And I think those are the things that people haven't, they kind of understand it intrinsically, but they haven't really grasped it.
Mm.
But I think the amount of waste that's chucked away every year is a scandal, and I think people need to know it. But also the fact that so little of it finds its way back into glass production is quite shocking to people, especially in the era today where there's a number of companies out there offering a low carbon glass, saying it's got a higher
Yes.
recycled content. It's not end of life recycled content. So I think there's a lot of misinformation. You might want to call it greenwashing, but there's a certain amount of misinformation out there, which I don't think is helpful. But there's also a lack of education in terms of the size of the problem and what the issues are. Perhaps to me, in my words.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, if we sort of know what the situation is and some of the problems, where's the sort of potential? What's the potential of our industry to actually make a big change towards saving the planet? If it's all about planet and people and places, where's the potential in our industry?
Oof. Uh, I mean, I think as a business, or as a glass business, I'm not just talking about us, everybody else. I think we've been frightened of the end of life glass because it comes with a lot of risks,
Mm.
and those risks potentially damage either the tank, the float tank where the glass is made, or the actual glass itself that's made. So I think that risk of those contaminants getting into the manufacturing process has caused a lot of people to stay away from it, and maybe for good reason. And I think we still have those same challenges. So the question is, either you stick your head in the sand and go, well, we just hope it goes away, or you say, we've got to deal with these challenges that come and find a way of managing the risk, and reducing the risk. And that's been very much our strategy. There are risks and it causes problems, no doubt about it. But what do? You, as I say, you can't stick your head in the sand. You've got to do something about those challenges. So that's kind of the strategy that we've taken on board. And you've got to spend money. You've got to spend money to make that happen. But you've also got to make sure you minimize the risk on site, so that it's a twofold process. You minimize the risk of contamination on site, and then you have a backstop back at the factory to try and catch as much as you can that might get through the first stage. But I think the challenges for us as an industry is really just to take this seriously. And I think if I go back 3 or 4 years ago, the attitude was, well, we've got our pathway to net zero. We know we need to increase our recycled content. We need to look at alternative fuels. So we can neatly map out a little graph to show our pathway to net zero by 2050. But it's like, and then you ask the question, well, how's it going to happen? And everyone goes, well, I don't really know. And so I think it's that about grasping your future rather than waiting for it to happen. You can't sit back and wait for end of life glass to get back to us, because it ain't happening. So we got to go and get it. And so that, again, that's been part of our strategy, is say, we're not going to wait for it to come to us. We're going to go and get it, because it's the only sensible thing to do.
Yeah. Anyway, and it seems there is a strategy that's being fulfilled, and actually people can get involved in. So
yeah, it is green shoots. It is early days, but the signs are very promising. But I don't want to over egg it, because at the end of the day, it's hard work, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
Because we're not just, the idea of recovering end of life glass sounds simple in concept, but we're dealing with a whole deconstruction supply chain that are not used to doing this. And so, and again, even within a deconstruction company, they might agree with it at director level, but the guy on the shop floor has got to get the memo, and he's got to act differently. So, there are many, many challenges. And then you're successful on one project with one demolition contractor, you move on to the next, different team.
Right.
So all these things, it's just a time situation.
Is there a big compliance piece? Is there like the obviously with Grenfell and the whole building safety acts, we're talking about golden thread.
Right.
So is there a piece here as well about accountability and recording, and the whole compliance of where the glass got taken from? Is there a big red tape thing around that?
Not particularly. I mean, obviously, what we're doing has got no relation to Grenfell and the issues around the tragic Grenfell incident. But in terms of, we're very open, we're very accountable with what we do. When we recover glass from a site, when it gets back to our factory, we weigh it, we inspect it, and then we issue a certificate back,
Right.
Telling them how much glass has been recovered. Also, the fact that, say we recover 100 tons, we also say, of that 100 tons, all of it is going back into glass manufacture, because sometimes not all of it can. So we'll confirm how much goes back into glass manufacture. We'll say how much raw material saving was made, and then we'll give you them CO2 saving as well. So we issue that once we've inspected it, and everything. So
that conformity, is that something that's going to be? Is that because you've already had government consultation that says that conformity certificate is going to have to be for everyone who's it probably is already, I don't know.
This is not a legal conformity issue that we're talking about.
But will it be?
I have no idea.
Right.
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I think at the moment, when you look at the role of government in driving circular economy changes, I don't think anybody would say it's a sort of stellar performance at the moment.
Right.
It was very interesting. I did a survey last year as part of a master's degree that I did. Interviewed 57. In fact, I interviewed you as well.
Yeah.
One of the 57 people I interviewed.
Heinz.
I mean, you were the tops, of course.
Yeah.
But in general, most people, in order to make this stick, most people are saying it's going to take the government to do it. Sorry, say that again. Closely followed by the client group. But the fact is, if we wait for the government to do something, I mean, I think it's going to be too late.
Right.
So this whole issue of compliance and laws and regulations may follow, but we can't wait for it. And what's good is we've got the client group, certainly within London, that's driving this because they're squeezed between the ESG requirements of their investors who want
Yeah.
the green story, and they've got the ESG requirements of their tenants. Now, the tenant ESG requirements are more around operational carbon, but obviously we're talking predominantly about embodied carbon, making sure we take account of the embodied carbon. So I think that is becoming part of the story for the tenants, but I think it's certainly very important for the investment side and for the client side. And now when you get your pre-development audit done in London, all the materials in a building, they assign an embodied carbon value to those materials. So for a client to give accountability of what it's done with those embodied materials, I think is very much part of the circular economy story,
Right.
rather than a compliance issue. I don't see this at the moment being a compliance issue. I think it's just being responsible stewards of what we've got.
So, opportunities. What are the opportunities for people to get involved? Do you think, supply chain that's maybe not even an obvious supply chain? Is there opportunities for um, people who are listening to this and thinking, oh yeah, that's I want to do. I'm being asked to get involved in net zero.
Yeah.
I'm already doing a job, but how can I act responsibly? How can I get the memo? What some of the allied trades, for instance, that could start thinking differently?
Yeah, I've never I never cease to be surprised by the parts of the business that we weren't aware of, or allied businesses that we were not aware of. So, most of my life has been about facades on buildings, but the internal, refurbishment of buildings happens 2 to 3 times before a facade is refurbished. So that whole internal soft strip
Mm,
market is a fascinating market,
mm,
and potentially is actually far better for us in terms of cleaner glass, easier to deal with.
mhm.
So that's come along, and
Do you talk about retrofit?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just internal
Hmm. Yeah.
refurbishment. As I say, it's happening on a more frequent basis. So that's an interesting marketplace. And again, some of the players are similar in terms of the demolition
Mm,
guys. Some are different. So yeah, I think if there are people out there who have got opportunities, I think now they can see it working.
mm,
There's a chance to just ask the question of, do you have something we can get involved in? We got involved last week with an architect's practice who are moving offices, and as part of their deal, they've got to return the
yeah.
office back, strip it out, and they wanted to recover the glass. Now they would have liked to reuse the glass, but for lots of technical reasons that wasn't possible. Um, but we are recycling it. That probably wasn't a typical thing we'd want to do. The volumes weren't very big, but for them it was a principle.
Hmm.
So I think we are finding people out there who will do it because it is the right thing to do. And now I think we've got 4 or 5 case studies now of projects we've done in London.
Hmm.
So I think people can see it, and I think just ask the question.
Right.
You know, I mean, at the end of the day, the prerequisite is I've got a lot of glass. I don't know what to do with it, and if
Mm,
they're in that situation, we can help.
right. Um, yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear because our touch points are with architects, with FM, with contractors, and stakeholders. People who are actually owning the building.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. Like we signed up recently to some software that just gives us access to the whole of the UK sort of commercial market.
Right.
And if you read the press, you think everything's quite stagnant, but the
Mm.
amount of deals that are being done in London on a weekly,
Yeah.
basis is huge. It masses. Whenever I think, okay, well, like, is it going? I go in there and go, no,
Don't need
just
to get another job.
yeah, yeah. Do I need to get a job? I go in there and go, like, there's, I don't know, at least 20,000 buildings. of a certain type,
Yeah.
that if you just focus on those, so it's always going to be
And
evergreen.
it's really fascinating for us because typically, we've got involved at the sort of design stage with the architect, with the facade consultant. We generally got involved a bit later in the day. But because we're now, there's so much interest in recovering end of life glass off buildings, we're getting involved right from the start, right from the get-go. Some of them were playing catch up, but on a lot of jobs, we're getting involved much earlier. And again, once somebody's instructed a deconstruction or demolition company, something's going to happen in its place very, relatively quickly. Main contractor will come on board after that. So yeah, I would say it's not roaring success at the moment, but certainly I would say the market is still busy.
So impact,
Impact,
impact. This is
impact,
a provocative
impact
one.
me. Oh, I like a bit of provocation.
This is a provocative one. If we don't do anything, what's going to be the impact to?
That's not an option. Doing nothing is not an option.
Well, it has been for a long time.
Well, it has, but if we were doing nothing, I think I've spent 3 years of my life getting paid to do nothing, probably.
Mm.
Um, so,
I mean, do you believe that, like what we're doing or what you're doing is having a big enough impact? Because obviously it's an investment. It's investment in
yep.
time, effort, a huge investment, and against all the float liners and the tanks and the people that are doing all this stuff, is the impact going to be worth? Is the juice worth the squeeze?
I sincerely hope so. Like I told you before, it is early stages, but one of our principles is scalability. We have 4 principles in terms of our strategy moving forward, and one of the key parts of it is scalability. So we don't want to do something that we recover 5 tons of glass off a building and it jams us up and we can't do anything. Whatever we do has got to work and it's got to be scalable to cope with those hundreds of thousands of tons of glass a year. So I do believe the way we're heading will have that kind of impact if we can get access to the glass, if we can continue to develop the network that we have as well. So you and I are not young men anymore, are we?
No, we're not. Thank you for reminding me.
And I kind of think I don't want to give myself to something that's not having an impact. Yeah, I've got better things to do with my time than just faff around in the shallows. I only want to do something that is going to have an impact, and it's a personal commitment as well as something I do for a job. It's beyond a job for me because I just think I don't want to leave, even if my contribution is tiny in the scale of things, I still want it to have an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not for my fame or whatever, just because it's important that we try and leave this world in a better place, and it seems to be going the wrong way at the moment. So, yeah, I do feel passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
Personally invested.
yeah, and it comes across. I mean, it's always good, and like when I'm doing these things, I mean, we started off the conversation. I'm having the time of my life in an industry that you've worked already
Yep.
for, I don't know, 30 odd years, probably, 40 maybe even. I don't know. How long is it?
It's nearly 30 years.
30 years. 30 years in the industry, and still passionate, still looking to have an impact. So, it's great. Is there a need that's been unmet at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, of course there is. There are probably many needs that are being unmet at the moment. I think we're still in the childhood phase with all this sort of stuff. It's not a mature thing. So I think there are many needs that are unmet. I think there's some of those perhaps are not needs that are unmet, but there's just that lack of awareness, knowledge, lack of action, lack of people taking responsibility. There's a lot of things that are needful in this moment. And I think, again, I ask myself the question, it's a little bit back to the impact one, but am I happy just to sit around and wait, or am I going to give this an almighty kick up the backside to try and get it going? And I'd rather give it the almighty kick up the backside to try and get it going. Yeah.
But let me. I'm going to drag some more
Come on,
unmet needs.
drag me.
Unmet needs. Like if you're talking to clients, end users, and you're talking to contractors, and what are their unmet needs that like they're saying, okay, well, look, we know we want to participate, but we haven't got an easy route in, so that sort of unmet need.
I I mean, I think the unmet needs are the same that when we talked to them 3 years ago. They've got to have a solution that somehow works, maybe not quite the way they perceive it in terms of cost, time, and the route back. You know, those are their drivers. I don't know if I call them needs. They're really drivers for them as a
Well,
business.
if we want to participate, as a company. So, for instance, I've already talked to you about a major building in London,
Yep.
and that was I was thinking, okay, for me I need to provide a service that says, I want to get involved in the net zero. I want to reduce carbon capture. I want to do something, right? So I want to do something that says, okay, well, I was really proud of working on that job,
Yeah.
because all of the jobs that I've worked on, there's some that stand out and go, yeah, I really enjoyed that, and it
Yeah.
feel, a warm feeling, and it's not, isn't, and it's never about the job that I made the most money on,
Yeah.
and now I'm seeing this through talking to likes of yourselves and people who are involved in this industry, who are looking at that going forward, and I'm thinking, yeah, actually, if I could have a certificate that says this is what you got back as a result of
Yeah.
doing something sustainable, responsible, um, I'm part of that by association. I'm part of that. How easy is it really for me to take off 10,000 square meters of glass and give it to you, and you give me a certificate back?
We try and make it as easy as possible, but obviously we need to understand the scope of the challenge.
Yeah,
You know, obviously it's a little bit different for you because you would look at actually taking the units out,
yeah,
where the demolition guys, they're just literally pulling the whole lot into
smash
the
it.
building. Yep. So again, it would be a slightly different strategy for you guys, and it one that we developed together. So we have a full-time project manager in London
Right,
who works for us. So we'll basically go along with you, do a survey, talk about the best way of recovering the glass, and come up with a strategy together.
right.
And I think we have certain principles which we work to, got our guiding principles. I sound like I'm a cult now, but anyway, we're not a cult, but we got sort of these guiding principles we work to. But within that, there's just different strategies. And what was really interesting was we are just doing a job in Victoria at the moment in London, and there were 4 demo contractors tendered the job. All 4 of them used our sort of well, I don't really want to call it a method statement because it wasn't a legal document, but they used our suggestions for how to recover the glass. But their bids when they tendered the job all were kind of like nuanced versions, because what they did, they took what we needed in terms of keeping the glass
Yeah,
clean, contamination risks. They took what we needed and they adapted it to suit how they would deconstruct the building.
mm,
And each one had a slightly nuanced solution to it,
hmm,
but still incorporating what we needed out of it. So it's more of an amalgamation. It's more of a team
right.
work thing. So I think we just discuss it with you and come up with a strategy together.
See,
We're only part of the story here, yeah? You're
yeah,
part of the good news story too.
yeah. And just as you were talking, I was seeing, something set up on site, almost like a industrial shredder, where we take a unit and put it into a shredder and then give you a bag. Is it as simple as that, or is it
No.
no?
If it was a domestic type
Yeah,
of unit where you've got no laminated glass, no window films, and the units weren't too big, we do have a shredding machine
right.
in a shipping container, which we can take to site.
Okay.
But it's more of a domestic
Yeah, so it's domestic.
type situation. On most commercial projects, well, yeah, a fair number of commercial projects, we've got window films on the glass, we've got laminated glass. So the deconstruction method is somewhat different.
Yeah. Okay.
But we'll find a solution. And our ideal situation, again, with most of the demo guys, is breaking the glass on site, bagging it, and then when they got 26 bags, we send a flatbed lorry and pick it up at our expense.
Hmm.
And providing the glass is clean, bagged properly, we actually pay for the cullet.
What's that sort of in terms of weight? What's 26 bags,
Nearly 20 tons of glass.
20 tons of glass? Okay.
So they're dumpy bags,
Hmm.
effectively.
Yeah, yeah,
1 ton dumpy bags, but they don't fill them to the top.
yeah, yeah.
So we generally get 6, 7, 800 kg in them, something like that.
Okay.
So depending on the types of material it is.
Okay. So, and the T, which is the final part of point is, okay, so if you were king or mayor or prime minister for the day, what's the transformation? What's the easiest way to transform going forward? What would you like to see? Like if you can, click your fingers and say, right, okay, now everyone is doing this. As you said, you're invested in. You're now, in your early years of
The
retirement.
prime of my life, of
Yeah,
the early years of my retirement.
yeah,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, the prime of your life.
Prime.
Yeah,
I think I've gone past the prime, mate. I think that's
yeah.
behind me now.
Um, what would you like to see? What?
Well, I think you've already said it really.
Mm,
It's we just like people to be told if I was king for the day,
yeah,
I would just make it an absolute rule that end of life building glass has to be recovered back to building glass in the circular economy. And I would make that my first edict of my glorious reign.
right.
Um, and honestly, there may be some jobs that we can't recover for whatever reason, but it's not an opting in, it's an opting out situation.
Hmm.
Yeah. Because at the moment it's an opt in,
Right.
and it's almost the client. They don't not really like this, but they're almost like they're sitting there going, "Why should I do it?" Now there are clients out there who want to do it,
Hmm.
but they still got to tick the cost time, routes.
Yeah.
So yes, so my first edict as glorious emperor of the whatever glass realm
Yeah.
would be just to say you just got to do it,
Mm,
and really, no more excuses.
yeah.
I just don't think it's acceptable. And every time I open my laptop, the screensaver that my company's put on there, it talks about these these steps that the climate's going through, that once you've gone past them, it's unrecoverable.
Hmm.
And I don't know how many steps we've gone through. I think it's something like 4 already. And so for me, it's just a constant reminder of every time I open my laptop, it reminds me, what am I doing to make a difference today?
Right.
You know, and I'm not. This is not some evangelical thing here,
Yeah.
but it's just a focus that just makes me think, well, what more could we do? So
Mm,
yeah,
mm. No, inspiring. No, it's been really good hearing that. I know on and off camera we've had different chats, but number one, I applaud that what you're doing, what San Gaban are doing, and it gives us inspiration for like that we can talk to with confidence to customers and
yeah,
say, yeah, we can, like as an installation company, as a sort of facilities
yeah.
company, that we've got routes to market, and they're not, Heath Robinson ideas. They're, like they're global ideas that have been uh, tested, and there's a proper strategy for it,
Mm.
and it's going to make a difference.
I think that's important because now we have case studies.
Yeah.
Because we finished 7 projects in London,
Mm,
we started another 4. We've got over 30 in the pipeline.
right.
So the case study is a bit difficult because sometimes we can't use the name of the project,
Yeah.
but we have the case studies, and I think that's really important because
Mm,
people want to join in with a good news story.
yeah.
They don't necessarily want to be the first person to create the good news
Mm,
story. So case studies are a powerful tool for us
mm,
that you can put in front of clients and go, it's already happening.
mm.
You're not the guinea pig, Mr. Client.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is also because, I think with any change, you get the sort of entrepreneurial people,
Mm,
early adopters,
yeah.
yeah, who will just do it because they don't mind taking that
Yeah.
risk. But then we kind of hit the main group that kind of want to do it, but they just want a bit more
Mm,
reassurance to do it. And I think the case studies
yeah.
bring that bulk group through now to start, so we can start to scale this thing up. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, I look forward to being one of your case studies soon.
Well, goodness me, sounds very exciting.
Thank you.
Well, it's always been a pleasure to know you, Rob. So
Thanks, mate.
thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. And that's it for this week's show of On Point. We've had some fun, had some chat, and got some insight. So look forward to the next one. Thank you.